Thank you. All right. So I'll spend the next 30 minutes, a little bit more, talking to you about my work in the last 12 years as a neuroscientist, and I leave some room afterwards both for questions about how it translates to business, which is somewhat what I do right now, but also to what I call the inspiration part, where I try to also tell you why I think it's not just a theoretical idea that should be done by labs, but also something that would be in your life in the coming years. Okay, so maybe I should start with something else. I tend to speak very fast, especially when I get excited. So I need someone from you, from the front row, to raise your hand every time it becomes too fast, you think, for yourself or for the audience. So everyone gets to raise their hand, but you maybe channel everyone else's behavior. Okay, so the point of my talk, I'm going to give it to you in the beginning and I'm going to repeat it at the end, is to suggest that our understanding of the brain has evolved in the last 10 years. And what it's brought to us is some new thinking about kind of our role in controlling our behavior. So whereas we used to think of the brain as the kind of equivalent of who we are, as us equals our brain, we now have more understanding of the fact that maybe in your brain there's more than one entity, if you want, living with you and governing your thoughts. And part of what we call our consciousness, or us, is a mechanism that comes and takes all the historical events in your memory and weaves them into a narrative. And what it does mostly is looking at the past and trying to kind of come up with a story that's coherent that can explain this behavior. And the reason it's important and not just a theoretical idea is because once we accepted this idea, we can actually go into your memory and change things, and you will create a new narrative for yourself. And you will never question this understanding of who you are, and you will just walk in your day with different understandings of who you are. So what we call consciousness isn't just how we tell our story, isn't just what we call the truth, isn't experience of the reality that we go through. It's also a way for us to make sense of the world. And in the context of both psychology and business, when we try to talk about changing behavior, many times we try to teach people and give them more information and think that if we just give them the right information, everything is going to be different. They're going to understand and behave differently. And now we come up with a totally different idea of how we do that. We just change something in your brain that leads you to just wake up with a different behavior and just carry that forward and tell yourself a story that it was always what you wanted. So in many ways, this is not a trivial thing to understand, that these 3 pounds that sit between our ears actually govern who we are and everything that we do, and that they actually allow us to change someone's behavior by just changing small indicators in there. And whereas I spend a lot of my time thinking about that, it's still hard for me to accept what I'm going to end this talk with, which is that if you learn to cope with your brain as something that drives things without you actually having a full understanding of why they happen, but kind of explaining differently, you can actually change your behavior. The best analogy I found was one that I experienced when I was a little kid that allowed me to kind of think about the world differently. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Israel in the early 80s, and at the time, computers were extremely expensive and computer games were very scarce. So if you wanted to play computer games, you would go to an arcade store where they had these big machines that you can play games. And I was a big fan of this game that some of you may be still familiar with. You play this little Italian plumber below, and you're trying to save the princess that this vicious gorilla kidnapped, and the gorilla throws barrels at you that you try to dodge while climbing up. And I went to the arcade store and played this game for roughly 30 seconds. Doing a pretty good job. So I managed to get to the second level and kind of, dodge a few barrels, when suddenly 2 words appeared on the screen that changed my view of control. And the 2 words were insert coin. And what it meant was that I wasn't playing the game at all. I was watching a video, a demo of the game playing itself, and I was just seeing it happening, but in my mind I was in control. So the movie was showing how the game goes, and the character was moving up and down and jumping above barrels and so on. And I was actually moving a joystick, but there was no connection between the joystick and the movie. But in my mind, there was. I was sure I'm in control. Now, granted, the intentions for the movie and my intentions were aligned, so it made sense for me to try to go up when the character moved up, to go left when it went left, to press the jump button. Granted, there probably were times where I tried to move right and it moved left, or tried to jump and it didn't. But because for the most part, the movie aligned with my intentions, I was able to tell myself a story that says that I'm in control. And only when I was confronted with reality in a way that I couldn't really resist anymore, I said, okay, I guess I'm just watching a movie. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because this in my mind is the best analogy we have right now to how the brain and our consciousness work. Things happen to us, behaviors occur, and we, after the fact, come back and own them, claim that we had agency, and try to tell a story that made us do those things as if we wanted them. And this is hard to accept. I'm going to repeat that one more time towards the end, but that is the message of what we're understanding right now about the brain, which is, for the most part, things happen and we can explain them if we look at the brain, but we don't necessarily explain them well if we ask you. So if we ask you to tell us a story, you will come up with a story. If I ask you why you did what you did, you will always have an answer. But more and more we see that there's misalignment between the answer that you give and what our brain tells us, and sometimes even how you actually will explain your intentions. So this is a theoretical idea. However, there are by now a few ways for us to actually test that. So in one of the studies that we're running right now, that's based on a study that was done here in New York a few years ago, we essentially are able to show people the gap between the moment that your brain made a choice and the moment you come to explain this choice, and we can show you that those are not necessarily aligned, and in fact we can change things and you will still defend your choice. So what we do in this study, we essentially bring people to the lab to make very basic choices that mean nothing to them, but are continuous and repeated. So what the idea is, if you're a subject in the study, we bring you to the lab, you will sit down, and the guy in the back who is running the experiment will pull two cards. And he would ask you to make a choice. And the choice is which of the two people you see here you find more attractive? The guy on the left or the guy on the right? So let's play it with you. Who do you find more attractive? The guy on the left or the guy on the right? The guy on the left. Why? Smiling. So this is one trial out of about 100 trials in this experiment. Let's say you're a subject, we show you two cards, you make a choice, we give you the card you chose, you hold it in your hand and you say, I like this guy because he's smiling. Now, you don't know any of them, they mean nothing to you, it's many, many choices that all are kind of arbitrary, but you make them and you always have an answer. So if you did this, we pull a new pair of cards, again, had you make a decision, give the card, explain, and so on. So this is the experiment from your perspective, very simple. But there's actually a twist here that makes it more interesting. Because the guy in the back, the guy that gives you the card, isn't just a regular guy. He's a magician that we hired. And he uses sleight of hands in 1 out of every, say, 20 trials to give you the card you didn't choose. So if you chose the guy on the left, he would give you the card with the guy on the right. And two interesting things happen in this experiment. First, people rarely notice. People rarely say, you know what, I chose this one and you gave me the other one. That's already interesting, but what's more interesting is that when they get the card they didn't pick, they go on and explain to us why this was their choice. So you chose A, I give you B, you take B and you say, I wanted B because of so-and-so. Now, granted, it's not going to work if it was a significant, important choice. I can't replace your wife or husband and you would not notice. I can't replace, your career or your job. But we're playing with more and more complex things, and turns out we can explain and change a lot of things that people think they would never be able to explain differently. So we can change people's preferences on politics now, and it works. So not really Democrat, Republican, vice versa, but on some nuanced choices like gun control and maybe climate change, we can actually move you a little bit just by changing what you think you have chosen. And also, we basically can use that in the context of business to show you how little you know about your business or choices when it comes to marketing. So for example, imagine you go to the grocery store to buy a variety of things and you have like a shopping list and you go and you at some point get to the aisle with a toothpaste and you say, okay, toothpaste is an important choice, I'm going to actually give this one a lot of attention. And you look at the two options that you have there, let's say Colgate and Crest, and you say, okay, the one on the left is more expensive, but this one is a bit bigger, and this one is minty, but this one is whitening, and you kind of make a table of all the things things that you think are important, then you make a choice, you put it in your basket and you go on shopping. If I'm gonna go into your basket at some point between the moment you made the choice and the moment you get to the checkout counter and replace the item with the other option, chances are that you won't notice this change. But not only that, when you go outside, if I stop you and I say, hey, there's a focus group, you want to know why you chose this versus that, you're going to come up with an answer. And the reality is that it's very, very hard for us to accept the fact that memories in our mind are not necessarily true. We're going to spend a lot of time protecting our memories. In fact, there's a lot of discussion right now out there about fake news and fake information, and people spend a lot of time challenging and being skeptical about things coming in from the outside. They say, I don't really trust this piece of information. I'm going to validate it. I'm going to argue against it. If it's something that we don't really like, we're going to spend a lot of mental efforts trying to convince the person who gives it to us that they're wrong or that something is not right about the facts, but we never ever challenge the facts that already are inside. This is something that we protect. So if you leave this room right now and you go have dinner with your friends tonight, and at some point one of your friends said, oh, it was amazing what we did today when we played tennis at 1 p.m. You say, no, at 1 p.m. I was in a talk in my office. And they say, no, at 1 p.m. we were playing tennis. You'd say, come on, I remember clearly. I was in this room. I can describe the room to you. They're going to start showing you evidence, a video of yourself playing tennis, 10 people that were there telling you we were with you playing tennis. It's going to take a lot of effort for them to convince you that you weren't where you were, because your mind is set to protect what it thinks is true. That is kind of an essential part of our reality. We don't challenge things that are already inside. And in many ways, this is what I'm going to argue is one of the things we need to change right now, which is the fact that our brain isn't fully in control of what's going on, but also that the memories and the stories that we tell ourselves are coming up afterwards and aren't necessarily true. In fact, my students made this t-shirt that I really like that say, don't believe everything you think, which is kind of a joke, but also the message of today's talk, which is that somehow what's inside is not guaranteed. Okay, up to now I kind of gave you philosophy. Let's talk a little bit more about practical things we do with people. So we look at the brain, we try to understand how the brain actually encodes information, how thoughts get inserted into the brain and restored, and how we actually talk about that. And I assume I don't have to convince you too much that the brain is the seat of your thoughts and your behaviors, but we have more and more evidence right now from people whose brains change, and with those changes, their personality change, that suggests that actually really who we are is in our brain, so much so that it's stronger than what we think is us. I'll give you an example. You may be familiar with the story of a woman in San Diego, I think 8 years ago, roughly calling the police and saying, my husband, that I've been married to for the last 10 years, became a pedophile. I don't know what to do. I'm really worried about our 4-year-old daughter. You've got to come and arrest my husband. And the police indeed come and they find child pornography in his computer and they arrest him and he goes to court. And as the trial begins, he complains about a headache. And it's ignored on the first day, ignored on the second day. On the third day, he has a seizure in the courthouse. So they pick him up and carry him quickly to the emergency room where a neurologist looks at his brain. And what they see is a massive tumor pressing on the left front part of his brain that should have caused him also pain, but definitely risks his life. So they send him straight from the emergency room to the operating room, where a surgeon removes the tumor in a complex surgery. And then when he wakes up after 12 hours of surgery, he no longer has a tumor, but also he is no longer a pedophile. He says, I don't know what happened to me. It was embarrassing, and I'm ashamed, and I'm guilty, and I don't know what to do with that. And he goes to court, and in an unprecedented ruling to that point, the judge in this court actually sends him back home, and she writes in her ruling that it wasn't his fault, it was his brain's fault, which kind of calls for a philosophical idea of what's the difference between me and my brain. And this story is just one example of how a change in your brain changes your personality, but actually it has a twist that makes it even more interesting. Because 10 months later, after the guy is sent back home on probation, the wife calls a second time and says, my husband is a pedophile again. Can you do something about it? And he's being taken again to the emergency room where they look at his brain, and they see that part of the tumors came back, metastasized, and it's pressing on the same area. And so he's going through a second procedure where they take it out a second time, and again he goes back to his normal behavior. So this is like a controlled experiment. You behave it one way, you have it one way, you change it, you behave differently. And this is just one example out of many, many examples we have right now to the fact that we can actually change your brain a little bit, and even against your intention and desires, you will become a different person in some aspects of your life, and it will be hard for you to go back. Okay, so now that we kind of accepted that, the question is, can we find who you are in your brain? Can we change your personality? And can we also tell you who you are even when you say, no, I want the opposite, or explain to you your choices, maybe even before you make them. So for a while, looking at the brain was done in one of two big ways. With animals, we can obviously look at the brain directly. We open their brain, mice, rats. We stick electrodes inside their head, and those electrodes are fine microphones that listen to the activity of brain cells in a very, very accurate and precise way, and tell us basically what the person or the animal is thinking about in a very, very direct way. That's the ultimate way to study the brain, looking directly inside one. We can do it with animals, we can't do it with humans, for obvious reasons. So instead, what we do with humans is we study the brain from the outside using imaging techniques. So we use big machines that inject magnetic fields or look at the activity from the outside and try to infer how the brain works from looking at the outside. Now, if you were to somehow be able to poke inside a brain and see what's going on there, what you will see is a forest of cells that look like these. And if you were to listen to them, you would hear the sound of cells speaking, which is essentially perfect. So if you were to translate the electrochemical activity of brain cells, how they speak to each other, you would hear this. Basically, these are electrical discharges of ions, of movement of cells, if you want, of ions from one cell to another. If you put a microphone next to them and you translate it into audio, this is how it sounds. So those bursts of activity, those what we call firing, is the language of the brain. Each cell, when it speaks by changing its firing frequency from very low to very high. And if we can tell what happened in the real world while those cells were firing, we can actually decode what you're thinking about. So if every time I show you a picture of your mom, one cell fires, we would say that this correlation indicates that this is part of a network of cells that code thinking about your mom. Okay, so this is how thoughts look in the brain. And this is where I also tell you that I lied to you a few minutes ago, and now I'm gonna be clear about what we do. So I told you that there's actually two ways to study the brain. With animals, we can look inside, and with humans, we look at the outside. But my lab is part of a small group of labs, about 5 labs in the world, that actually do what I just said was impossible, which is look at the brains of humans from the inside. What we do is we open people's brains, we stick electrodes inside their head, and we eavesdrop on the activity of individual cells in their brain while they think, while they're awake, while they're talking, try to understand how it works. And I'm here to look for volunteers for this project. What we do is we work with patients who undergo brain surgery for clinical purposes, and we piggyback on the clinical procedure to also study the brain for research purposes. So I'm going to show you now how it looks. If you don't like pictures of brains, this is designed to look away. I'm going to show it for a brief moment, and then I'm going to skip that. This is roughly how it looks. Electrodes on the surface of the brain that are tiny enough to be able to decode the activity of individual cells in the brains of a patient. When we wrap it up and close it, it looks like that. So this is, now you can look back if you looked away. This is the setup of our studies. Patients come. Our patients typically have a brain disorder that they couldn't resolve in any other way. And the last result, so to speak, is coming to a clinical procedure where the neurosurgeons are going to open their brain and try to identify the spot in their brain that is the main onset location for their problem. So think of epilepsy, for example. Epilepsy typically is an anomaly in your brain where one cell in your brain, so to speak, starts firing with no reason. No provocation, kind of like an earthquake in your brain. And it speaks and other cells answer, and other cells answers those who answered. And before long, there is a cacophony of cells speaking in your brain. And when those cells speak in your brain, they actually lead to a change in your behavior. So when cells speak without any provocation, maybe you start shaking or losing consciousness or falling up down. And the risk, of course, is that you maybe will have a car accident if you drive your car, or maybe you drop your baby if you're holding your baby. So the risks are beyond just the epilepsy, the risks to your life. Most patients with epilepsy get treated with medications that suppress the seizures, but if they can't respond well to medications or something doesn't work, they become candidates for this procedure, where we're going to bring them to the lab, open their brain, stick electrodes in the area in their brain where we think or suspect the seizures onset are. We'll plug those wires to a computer, and we'll start recording their brain activity 24/7 for the next couple of days, while they sit there and wait to have a seizure. Now we want them to have a seizure, because when they have a seizure, we can actually trace this seizure's flow in their brain as it goes and figure out exactly where it started. And once we have enough seizures to identify the location, we can actually take out the electrodes, resect the part of the brain that starts the seizures, close everything, and send the patient away seizure-free. So that's the clinical purpose of this procedure. And what I do is I say to the patient, you're already here. You have electrodes in your brain, and we're recording your activity all the time while you watch TV, read books, talk to your friends. Do you mind also letting me show you pictures of Colgate and Crest and see how you make decisions and understand how thinking works in your brain? Now, the patients are very happy to participate because they really can't move their head much, and this is most of what they do in the hospital talking to us. So now there's a chance for us to actually look at the brain of a human from the inside and eavesdrop of the activity of cells in their brain and see how thinking looks from inside. So here is an example of how it looks. So here's one patient. What you see here are the images that they see on a screen in front of their eyes. And what I'm going to play to you is the sound of one cell in their brain that codes something. Try to see if you can figure out for yourself what this cell codes. What is the thought that this cell responds to? So this is the cell in this woman's brain that code the thought of Marilyn Monroe. Every time she thinks of Marilyn Monroe, this cell fires. And in fact, in your brains right now, if you know what Marilyn Monroe is, or who she is, or have any concept of her, every time you think about that, cells in your brain come to life. And they do the same thing right now. This is how a thought looks inside the brain. Now, what's interesting is that this is not just a thought that's specific to this image. It's every representation of the idea of Marilyn Monroe. And we know that because we can do many things. We can actually show her not just one picture, still image, we can actually show her, for instance, movies. And you'll see that when she sees a movie with Marilyn Monroe, the same cell fires in a different pattern, but the same idea. So you hear the cell again. You see different movies. And the activity is sustained as long as it's thought in this person's mind. And what's even more remarkable is that it doesn't have to come from the outside. If you close your eyes and imagine Marilyn Monroe, the same thoughts would occur in your brain and the same cells would fire. And we know that because we tried that with our patients. One of my colleagues actually had the patient sit there and just recall from her memory the clips she has seen in the morning. And what you're going to see now is that when the patient remembers Marilyn Monroe, the same cell fires, and in fact, it fires seconds before she speaks. So we see her thoughts coming to her. This means that we can now look inside the patient's brain and see how her thoughts emerge. And what's interesting here isn't just that we can decode the thoughts, but also that we can decode them earlier than she expresses them, and even earlier than she thinks she thought them. So if you ask the woman, when did you think about Monroe, she would say, when I said that, or a fraction of a second before. She wouldn't imagine that in her brain, there are cells that come to life that code the thoughts seconds before she speaks. In fact, when I talk to you right now, I don't really feel that anything I'm saying is being planned in my mind before. I feel that whatever I think it, I say it. And the reality is that you and I are both witnesses of my brain happening. It's just that I own it, and I think that I wanted to say it because it came out of my mouth. We both experience whatever my mind is saying in real time, but one of us thinks that it must be something that I really, really feel comfortable with because it came out of my mouth. And we don't experience those processes that come up with the verb and the structure and the vowels and put them together and the adjective and build it and build the idea. We just see the bottom line and we call this my thoughts. Now, once we find thoughts in your brain and we can actually decode them, there's a lot we can do with it beyond just predict what you're going to say. We can also do all kinds of things that are now really in the public eye a lot, which is connect your brain essentially to machines and have you connect or control things on the outside world. So we can do things like have the patient sit there in bed and play games with her mind. So she just sits there and thinks of Marilyn Monroe. And when she does, the spaceship goes up and we can have her play a game where she tries to avoid obstacles just by thinking of Marilyn Monroe. And we can kind of punishing her or giving her reward for doing that. We can do that, of course, to show that we can do it, but the idea behind it is that we can now take people who lost the ability to control some parts of their bodies because the connection was severed. Think of soldiers who were hit, say, from the neck down and now have no connection from the mind to the arms, and we can now read their thoughts and control a prosthetic arm that will actually activate their wheelchair or turn the channels on the TV or write emails for them or do everything that they can't do with their motor activity themselves just by thinking their thoughts in their mind. And they can also do the most interesting thing that I could think of in terms of neuroscience right now, which is decode a person's thought in real time. So our main work a few years ago was one where we basically had patients sit in bed, think on one of multiple things that we found earlier in the morning in their brain: Marilyn Monroe, Michael Jackson, their mom, their dad, the Eiffel Tower, anything we could find in the morning in their brain, and we can just decode and project their thoughts on a screen in front of their eyes. Now, what's really interesting about that is, first, that we can do that, but also that once we can do that, we can actually find how early can we tell what you're gonna think, and also at what point is your brain taking those thoughts and making them into a conscious percept? At what point is your brain calling all of that reality? And the interesting thing is that it's not obviously happening in real time. In fact, it doesn't happen necessarily at all. So here's an example. Here's a picture that you all see. It's kind of flickering, and I can tell you that your brain is already upset with this picture, and it tells it something is not right here. It's just that you don't listen. Your consciousness isn't aware of that. So what you see here is actually not just one, but two pictures. They alternate, and there's one aspect of the picture that keeps changing and coming back. And I can tell you that your brains all see it. In your brain, there's a cell that right now fires and stops and fires and stops. It just doesn't tell your consciousness. Try to see if you can, raise your hand if you can see that. Don't say or just raise your hand. So those of you who don't see it right now get nervous. You're starting to scan the picture from top to bottom, left to right. Maybe the Canada flag, maybe it's the shadow of the soldiers. You count the soldiers, you look at the number of windows on the airplane. It's the engine in the center. I'm going to point it out. The good thing is that once you've seen it right now, you can never not see it. This is it. It's one-time learning. So for the rest of your life, it's going to be in your brain right now. And what's interesting, beyond the fact that it's a cool experiment, is the idea that in your brain, there's some cells that code engines. And those cells were firing and stopping all the time. It's just that somewhere it didn't bubble up into your consciousness, and you, even though you wanted it, couldn't get the part of your brain that holds it to give it to you. So somewhere in your brain, there was a gap between who knows the answer and who's actually in control. I'm showing you another example. So if you felt smart on the first one, you have a chance to try another one. Raise your hand when you see that. This one is harder, it seems. 2 people. It actually correlates with IQ. If you didn't see both, then no, it does not correlate with IQ. Okay, it's the leaves right here. A little harder. So we can go on and on with many of those examples, but the point is, somewhere in your brain, someone knows something and it doesn't tell you. Now, if I know that this person in your brain saw something, and I can find it in a gap that's big enough, I can actually not just find it out, but also change things. And where we're going with that is one step further, which is to see what happens if I change something before the time you become aware of it, and actually make you have a different experience of reality. So one of the things we did with our patients, we had them play a game, or we said, we're gonna have you make simple choices. Again, very basic. We give them a wooden box with 2 big red buttons, one on the left, one on the right, and we tell them, this is an experiment about making decisions. For the next 20 minutes, we ask you to just sit here, and whenever you feel like it, press the buttons on the left or on the right in random order. So left, right, right, left, left, right, left, and so on. Nothing important, just make choices. We're gonna wanna know how your brain looks when you make decisions to go left or right. That's it. But as always, there's a twist here. We tell the patient, by the way, because we care about choices, every time you press a button, we're going to turn the lights on for a second just to save the data from your brain. This is how we know that we're saving. So when we're saving, please don't touch anything. Wait for it to turn off, and then you can start another trial. So important, when the lights are on, don't touch anything. And we let the patient start the game, and for the first maybe 50 trials, the patient just presses the buttons and we just read their brain activity normally. But after 50 trials or so, when we feel that we can actually decode their thoughts far before he or she are executing them, we actually start the real experiment, where if at time 0, I know that in 4 seconds you're going to press the buttons, I wait 3.9 and turn them on their own. So when you press the buttons, the light's already on, and there's a big buzzer in the room, and we tell you, what did you do? You just ruined the experiment. We told you not to do one thing. Don't touch the button, the lights are already on. I'm so sorry, doctor, it kind of happened by itself. Never mind, you just ruined everything. We're going to start again, and make sure you don't do it again. What you see is this unique experience, the patient's experience, where what they want to happen has already happened. And they can try to do it faster. They can try to kind of trick us. They go to the right and then move to the left, but it doesn't matter. I'm inside their head. As soon as they know, I already know. So here's kind of how it looks. And what's remarkable is this kind of experience that we all can think about but not really believe. But when I tell you your thoughts are known to me before you, you kind of say, that's cool, but I don't really experience life like this. We call it the illusion of free will. We all can talk about free will as a philosophical idea, but we actually believe that we're in control. And these patients, for the first time, have this unique experience that they really feel this experience of not having control. You go to the restaurant, you say there's 3 items in the menu, steak, salmon, and salad, and you say, I want to take this, say, oh, sorry, we're out of salad. Oh, I was about to say salad, never mind. Steak or salmon? Oh, there's no salmon also. And we basically eliminate things from your life before you made them. And this gives you this experience of lack of control in a very unique way, which now we try to extend to psychology. What's interesting here actually isn't that. What's interesting is what happens next. So the fact that I can actually change things in the world before you experience them because I know them early is cool, but not surprising. Once I find the cells, I can do whatever I want. What actually is interesting is that we can do something even more complex. So if I know at time 0 that in 4 seconds you're going to press the button, I can wait 3.9 seconds and turn the button on by themselves, but I can also turn the lights on as soon as I know it. And if I turn the lights on when I know it, it's so early that you don't even know that you were about to know something. And effectively what happens is the patient sits there and see lights turning on, off, and they have no understanding of why those lights turn on and off. They don't know that it's their brain who wanted it because the lights turning on actually stops their brain from experiencing it. But their brain knows it because it sent the signal. So what happens is that there's actually a conversation here between me and their brain behind their back. And we know that it's true because at some point the cells in their brain stops functioning because they kind of see that they set an action to be happening and it didn't happen multiple times, so they just think something doesn't work and they just move to a different route and go back afterwards. So there's a unique opportunity here to speak to someone's brain behind their back and really get a sense of their person and their unconscious mind. And the reason it's interesting is because we live life through the part of the brain that is the conscious part, and we call this me. We think this is us. And now, for the first time, we can actually give those patients access to parts of their brain that they normally have no control over. Most of our brain is actually not under our control. When you see the world, it's already in color. Some part of your brain had to add the color, decode shapes and orientations, and when you see it, it's already in color. And if I tell you, please make the world black and white, you can't do that. Even though your brain has the capacity to change color, you can't really turn it off because it's happening under the hood in places that you have no access to. Even things that are more accessible to us are far from our control. Emotions. Emotions are something you can actually kind of control. You have some access to them, but they don't really fully under your control. You don't say, my mom is sick. I want to feel sad. I'm going to activate sadness right now. Okay, deactivate sadness. It's not working like this. They dawn on us. We can control the inputs, but at the same time, the emotions happen and we kind of are witnesses to them. Now, with these patients, for the first time in history, we can actually put electrodes in those places where colors happen, where emotions happen, where breathing happen, and teach them how to control their brain in a different experience. So we have now works where we teach patients how to control their emotions. We put electrodes in their emotional part of their brain and we tell them using feedback that something that they did right now actually send a feedback to the emotion. Tell them, now learn how to control your fear so you won't feel afraid or actually feel afraid and just change the levels. We can actually control them, let them control their breathing. So up to now, we define a person as alive or dead by looking at part of their brain that controls their breathing, and if it's not active, we call this person dead. With our patients, in one of our works, we can actually teach them how to move the control of their breathing to a different parts of their brain. So they seem like they're dead in many ways, but actually they're just controlling their breathing from a different part. And the idea is that now we unlock a lot more of our brain. All of our brain is active, but only a small percentage of it is under our control. And now with those electrodes that we put in different places, plus feedback from those places, we can actually teach people how to control them. Okay, so I want to use also the last 5 minutes to talk about something inspiring. And for that, I have to connect our work to what we're doing right now and where I think it's heading. First, a little bit of history. So October 28, 2010 is when the work I mentioned to you right now came to life, as in we published it. It was published in a very high-profile journal, academic journal, and because of that, a lot of people in the world cared about our work. And journalists called me and asked me questions about it, and one of them was a journalist from BBC England who said, we're really curious about how you can project people's thoughts on the screen. Tell me about that, and I explained the work a little bit, and then he says, what else can you do with that? Like if you can project someone's thoughts, can you project their emotions on the screen, or maybe their memories or their dreams? And I say, in theory it's possible. Thank you, bye. So the last thing that happened was that I told someone from the BBC that dream recoding is possible, in theory. However, the theory was lost quickly in the headline, and before long, the title was "Dream recording is possible," and there was still kind of quotations mark making it seemingly maybe possible, but this didn't stay with quotations mark very long. About 5 minutes into the moment our work came out, the entire world was up in arms about the fact that scientists are recording your dreams. And quickly, not just recording your dreams, but there were questions about how we do that and how long have we been doing that. People started calling me and saying that they want to subpoena me because I've been involved with a project by the CIA to record their dreams for the last couple of years. People called me and asked me if I can look at their spouse's dreams, a lot of that. There was actually a chef not far from here who is a famous chef in New York who said that he's been dreaming of a recipe for years now and he wants me to put electrodes in his brain and extract them. A big operating system company called us and wanted to option the dream recording machine in their next OS, and when I told them it doesn't exist, they said I'm playing hard to get and they're gonna build their own. There were websites and Wikipedia pages for the dream recording machine, and the world was excited about this thing. This was in fact, for a few days, the #1 story on science and tech dream recording. And despite me saying to everyone that it's impossible, the story had a life of its own. I was pretty frustrated, as you can imagine, from this thing. I called my dad, who's a journalist, and I said, "Dad, how do you kill a story?" And he said, "Son, no one cares about science. Just turn off the phone and wait. It's going to die on its own." It didn't happen. The story, because I didn't take calls, it just came via email, and a lot more attention was given to it. In fact, my not answering just made it worse. The worst thing I did was because it came out on October 28th, 3 days after it was Halloween. My students had the idea that we're going to go to a Halloween party, and I had the idea to make a joke of this and dress up like Sigmund Freud. So this is days of really massive sharing. The picture came out, and now there was not just like a headline, but also a picture of me looking at the and this was kind of in my life for about 2 weeks as a career-killing experience. But what was interesting is that I spent a lot of time talking to the news and explained to everyone that dream recording is impossible and that we didn't do it and that's not really how our work could be done because we only looked at patients when they were awake and nothing could work when they're sleeping. And this story actually died when Prince William proposed to his girlfriend, and this was like a much more important thing. And it was out of my life for a number of years until one day in April of 2013, I got a call from BBC again. And they asked me to comment again on dream recording. I said, you've been through it before, you know it's not true, and like this is a time to actually correct the mistake. And they said, wait, stop. We know that you didn't do that. But we actually wanted to comment on the work of Yuki Kamitani from Japan who did it. So it turns out that a group in Japan didn't know that it's impossible. And they just saw that someone did it, and they just follow up on our work. They actually wanted to improve on the same technique that we didn't use. And they were the first guys to do what we said was impossible. They were the first guys to actually record the dreams. They did it in a technique that was developed in Berkeley by a guy called Jack Gallant, where basically the idea is that you put electrodes next to the part of your brain that decodes visual activity, so not really the thoughts like we do, not Marilyn Monroe, but just lines and shapes. And they essentially, when people were awake, looked at their brain activity and in the back and realized that they could actually decode. On the left is a movie that people were watching, and on the right is what the computer suggests the person was seeing. And this was done using fMRI, which is a much more crude tool than the one we use. Instead of looking at Marilyn Monroe, you would see a person, or you would see a woman. That's about it. But the idea is that the group in Japan could actually have people go to a scanner and lie down there while their brain is being scanned. And fortunately, from my experience, undergrads tend to fall asleep in every study that you put them. So it was very easy to get them to fall asleep in the lab. And when they fall asleep, a computer basically looks at their brain activity and tries to decode one of a small number of categories. Is it text? Is it an object? Is it a person? And we turn out to be pretty good in being able to then wake up the patient and ask the person, tell me what you think you dreamt of, and get a sense of the narrative, if you want, or at least a kind of gist of what they're dreaming. And this unlocks one of the coolest, I think, thing in a human experiment, and the idea of looking inside dreams. Now, dreams have fascinated humans for the last, for millennia. And not only are they fascinating, but they also are in our mind the kind of access to our soul. You know, if you wake up and you tell your girlfriend that you had a dream about your ex-girlfriend, she's going to be upset with your awake self. And you can say, no, it was my brain created this movie. I'm not responsible. Somehow we get blamed for our brain's movies. And in that sense, whether it's true or not, we all think that dreams mean a lot. There's an entire set of professions that try to interpret dreams. There are psychiatrists who psychologists spend days on couches with people trying to have them tell their stories. And the reality is, whether they mean something or not, we don't know the full understanding, but for the first time in history, we can actually decode that. And that's remarkable, because up to now, we had to rely on your awake self to tell us the story of your dreaming self. And we know that the awake self and the dreaming self are not aligned. We know that the language you use to tell your dreams, for instance, is the language of your awake self. If you're blind when you're awake, you surely will tell your story as if your dreams were not with visuals. In the 1930s, people would describe their dreams in black and white. Only when TV and film started to have colors did people start describing their dreams in color. Because somehow in their mind, a dream is a movie, and so whatever was movies in their mind is how they describe their dreams. Which means that whatever we have as awake people is the language we use to describe our dreams, and this is unreliable. And for many, many decades, we couldn't really know what's going on in your dreams because we only had the awake self. And now, for the first time in history, we can actually look inside your dreams and actually decode the content and compare first what your brain tells me happened in your side and what you say, but also get access to something that you might have forgotten when you woke up. And this isn't just a cool thing that allows us to actually project dreams and tell you the story that you had in mind and see how they align to what it is. It also allows us to change behavior. Because what we learned in the last 3 years is that when you're sleeping, your brain isn't just resting. It's actually overworking, if you want, on doing a lot of things. And one of those things is actually choosing behaviors that it wants to save and ones that it wants to eliminate, so that when you wake up, you have a different story to craft. And if you go back to the beginning, where I told you that all our consciousness does is taking memories and building them into a narrative, now we know when it happens. We know that at some point during the night, there's a window of time that happens every 90 minutes, where your brain essentially looks at all the memories it has from the day and chooses which ones to encapsulate, which ones to eliminate. And if we go to the brain at this moment and change something, we can actually create a new memory so that when you wake up, you're going to build into a narrative and change your behavior. Not just a theory. In one of the studies that my colleague did a few years ago, in 2015, she took smokers who come to the lab and are asked to take a nap. That's all. They don't tell anything. They can take a nap. And when they get to this specific window, when your brain essentially assesses what's important in life, she sprayed the smell of nicotine into their nose, making their brain focus right now on smoking as a thought. And then immediately she sprayed the smell of rotten eggs, which is a smell that's known to scientists to actually penetrate your brain and make you have an aversive response without waking up. So she pairs in this person's brain the idea of nicotine and bad experiences, multiple times in different concentrations. And when the person wakes up after 2 hours, not only do they not know what happened, they actually think that it was just a regular nap, but their brain internalized the conditioning, and for the week after, they actually don't smoke or smoke very little. It functionally goes back afterwards. So we didn't find the solution to changing it entirely, but we find a way to start teaching your brain things that you will actually live by afterwards without knowing what happened. And of course, we have to try right now to do it repeatedly and see if it sustains, do it more strongly and see if it actually changes the behavior entirely. But now we know when your brain actually stores and creates memories, and if we come in between and change things, you're going to do the work for us in making those into a narrative, a conscious perception of yourself never smoking or never being in this room with us, and then you will actually use that to tell a different story of yourself. Okay, so why am I telling you all of that? And with this, I'm about to end. Because we kind of unlocked the meaning of the thoughts. We know the code of a thought, and we know how to find them in your brain. We're now able to map them, and we're able to project them into outside and actually use that to get access to what you're about to do before you do that. That's pretty cool. We can also look at that in specific moments in your life and change things that are under the hood, so you will only experience them after the fact and just defend them as if they were your thoughts and live a life that aligns with them. And we now can use that to even look at your brain and change your behavior in a massive way, such that you will actually stop all kinds of behaviors that you don't like. And now we're playing with the idea of actually coding dreams into your mind and actually going inside and making a story for you. So you can actually go to sleep and buy the dream by Spielberg and have a specific dream. Or actually seeing if we can align people's dreams. So take two people who sleep side by side and actually make sure that they actually have somehow related dreams. So you go on a date and you come back home and the day doesn't end. You actually continue the dream together. Or the ultimate goal of this work is to try to see if we can actually teach you new things when you're dreaming. So you can go to sleep and wake up knowing Kung Fu. Not working so far. But beside all of that lies the coolest thing which I'm going to end with, that I started with, I want to finish with. And that is the idea that we now actually change the center or the locus of control in our brain. So we live life like the character from the King Kong game, that I showed, Donkey Kong game earlier, thinking that we're controlling the character, and we give more and more evidence to people that we're not, but it doesn't change anything. We still think that we're in control. And it's because it's hard for us to change this. It's hard for us to accept the fact that my brain has components that make decisions, and I'm aware of those only after the fact and just explain them. But there's a good analogy here that I really like that allows me to at least accept it partially. And I think that if you follow this, if you just accept this partial understanding that I'm suggesting right now, it will help you in the future, and then we can take questions about how you can actually implement that. And this is an analogy from 408 years ago, when Galileo Galilei pointed his telescope to the moons of Jupiter and tried to observe their orbit. What he saw was that the planets were not orbiting, the moons weren't orbiting the planet the way he thought they should go, and the only way to explain this was to change the entire making of the solar system and put the sun in the center and Earth as the third planet from the center. Now, this to him felt like a failure of society. What does it mean that we're not the center of the universe? What does it mean that we're not the most important thing in the world? But once he accepted it, he was able to see far outside of what we thought the world was before. He could see far outside into the wide reaches of the universe. And in the 400 years to follow, we were able to explore the big universe and see a lot more of what's out there. Now, in the same way, in the last 10 years, beginning to understand that we're not the center of our own little universe, that in our own head, there are many, many planets, if you want, many voices, and the one we speak with is not the most important one, it's just the one we call us because it's the one we have most control over. And if we begin to understand that there's other voices there, and that we can actually give access to those voices using electrodes or using other methods, we can actually uncover more of what's in your brain and tell you what your dreams mean, what your choices mean, how you arrive at them, and so on. And in that sense, we're not only going to uncover the mysteries of the brain, we're going to understand the most interesting thing in the universe, which is us. Thank you. All right. So now we can talk about the philosophy of that on business or on anything that I want, which is to convince you that there's a need for people with a understanding of machine learning and coding in this field. So I made it seem easy. It's just like listening to brain activity. But the reality is that most of the problems we have right now are just time series that we need to decode. We know that something happened in the real world, that the brain was coding it, and we want to know what connects what. So there's a room for a lot of knowledge here. Questions? Yes?
Well, there's a ton. I have two, actually. One is maybe simpler to answer. It seems to me that there's a huge need for enhanced resolution with non-invasive mechanisms. Can you tell us something about latest developments in that?
Sure. So there is a big movement right now on that tries to basically use these results and make things that go inside your brain to control them. You probably heard about Brian Johnson and Elon Musk trying to go there. Generally, we want to poke inside our brain and control things. The problem is that the only way we know to get in the brain right now is to dig a hole in it and get inside. And this is not something that you all can try at home. So the science of that is pretty easy. Look, we know the language of the brain. We know how to do it. The question is, how do we get inside? The leading technique right now that people look into is ingestible, like trying to create pills that you will swallow, and they will travel inside your blood-brain barrier and get to your brain and live there and do things for you permanently. So we know how to create viruses that go in specific cells and live there, and we try to find the same way with pills. It's raising a lot of ethical questions and so on, and it also, I'm going to make a prediction. I'll tell you how I think it's going to work out. One Silicon Valley rich guy is going to just poke a hole inside his or her person's brain and stick a chip inside that will connect their thoughts straight to the World Wide Web. And this would allow them to have advantages. They would do high-frequency trading inside their head faster. They would solve math problems faster than they play chess better than you because they have access to the entire world. And everyone's going to think that they're insane for doing that. But then they're going to think, oh, they have advantage, I should do it the same. And within a few years, it's going to become widespread and everyone's going to do it themselves and then become mainstream. It's not entirely science fiction. It happened before. In the 50s or 40s, I think, the idea of putting silicon inside your breast seemed like an outrageous idea. Who's going to put something inside their breast? I think that right now, 70 years later, 1 out of 4 American girls age 16 asks for breast implants when she turns 16th birthday. So I think it's quick from the moment someone does it and it looks crazy to the moment we actually all accept it. So that's my prediction. Very soon in the brain. Second question, then we take,
So sorry, just really want to ask this. So it seems to me that a lot of the studies and experience you've described deal with decisions that are not very consequential, or to describe it differently, that people do not have a conscious interest in modifying. So, and this kind of, thinking about this makes me think about thinking fast and slow. And, it doesn't seem like their executive function, the prefrontal cortex, were involved there, or at least that they try to initiate them. So this description of you living as a bystander to decisions that are already made seems to be like a partial description of reality that applies to certain things, but that you're probably able to regain control if you apply other parts of your brain to. Is that correct? What can you tell us about that?
So up to now, we try to change simple things, like choices of people you don't know. And when we try even behaviorally to change your wife, and you pick the woman you like the more, and you pick your wife, and we give you someone else, you would notice right away. So it doesn't work with consequential choices on the behavioral part. However, the smoking experiment is indicative of the fact that actually we can change behaviors that were at least something that you were doing habitually. So the smoking experiment, and we now have one where we try to make people eat healthy. Again, they go to sleep, they can nap. We essentially activate the flavor of salad in their brain. When they wake up, we say, here's a buffet, choose what you want, and they choose themselves to eat healthy. This is starting to go in a realm that is a little bit more like real life, but it's still not, it's still simple choices. I don't think we can have you go to sleep a Republican, wake up a Democrat, or vice versa, yet.
Thanks.
Right.
Thanks for that talk. It was mind-blowing. So I work in advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting that you brought up Sigmund Freud because, advertising and public relations and Sigmund Freud, psychology have done this waltz for the past century. And all the examples that you gave were really awe-inspiring. And they were coming from individuals wanting to change their own behavior. But the field that I'm in right now is really interested in cognitive behavioral theory, choice architecture, where it's not necessarily, I want to be a better person. It's like, I have a product and I want you to buy it. And this terrifies me because it just seems like one more tool in the toolbox. And as exciting as this is, I just have this dystopian vision where you have the rich dude in Silicon Valley that has superpowers, and the 97% of people on Earth are having choices made for them, like the person that thinks they're choosing the button.
Okay.
How do you see it?
It's like a setup question. So absolutely. So this can be used to make people stop smoking or eat healthy, but it can also make you wake up and want Coca-Cola rather than Pepsi, and it works the same way. The brain doesn't know what thought that you. So it's absolutely risky. If I were to choose my dream audience, this would be this room. Because you, in many ways, are the ones who are able to navigate the choice. It would take forever until what we found right now, how we do that, will turn into a regulation by the government and something that's it's going to be self-regulation for now. Like companies will have to decide how to use that. And in the same way, we understand that we can make people eat healthy, we can also make them do things that are not great for them. And what I would say if I talk to my students, I would say, I hope I could speak to people that actually have the power to use it right now. Historically, I teach MBA students, and when I teach them, they're still young and kind of, pure. And we talk about cognitive biases, and we talk about behavioral changes, and they all are up in arms when we speak about how Procter & Gamble prices Tide as $6.99 when it's actually $7, but it's fooling your senses. And then they go and work for Procter & Gamble and they do the same choices. So because it's like, shareholders and pressure and so on. I think that science is only so good in offering options, and then the world has to decide what to do with them.
Do you have any tips for someone like me when somebody comes and says, like, this thing's going to be amazing, it's going to drive so many conversions, it's going to be so effective, other than it just feels wrong?
I'll think a better one than I have right now, because I think it's the. But I mean, you seem young, but I think in 20 years you're going to be the CEO of this company. So so at least let's agree that when you're going to CEO, you remember this moment, and I think, so I'm optimistic. I think that the world is actually getting better. So the fact you asked this question means that it's like, by the way, you see the problem, you see the potential, you see the opportunity, you see the threat. And I think that's a great first step. And the reality is that every time I give this talk with different version, people raise these questions, which means that we all see that, and we're both customers and like companies. So if you do it to one person in the evening, they're going to do you the day after. So I think that historically, humans are not great in using science for good. We usually find ways to exploit it, but I'm optimistic still. So that's my thought. 2 last questions? Great.
Hello. Thanks a lot for the inspiration talk. I'm just wondering, so would you consider your experiment as a counterexample to free will? Do you have any response from philosophers yet?
Okay, so I get asked a lot about free will as a philosophical idea, and the reality is that we don't have a good answer, in the sense that, so we get you beyond the moment you experience the free will. So if I ask you when you made a choice to go left or right, you would say now, and what we show you that this was a mistake. Surely the moment you made a choice is not the moment the brain made a choice. We can go back milliseconds, seconds before the choice was made and predict it with high accuracy. But it doesn't mean that there's no free will, it just maybe happened before. Maybe free will happened at time 0 and just you experienced it as free will at time 4. So we don't have the answer to, it's like the Big Bang Theory. We can go all the way to the very beginning, but we can't go beyond. I can tell you that we ask questions of our subjects in this experiment. And we can say that their psychology, like the patients, when they experience that their choices are being predicted, they do have all kinds of questioning about like more life, like they become a little bit more protective of rights, they defend criminals a little bit different. It kind of brings big questions about life. The counter answer is an example that I read a few weeks ago. There's a gene that if you carry this gene, I think you're 9 times more likely to be involved in a crime. Generally, I think 9 out of 10 people in death row carry this gene, and there's other statistics about this, and it's the Y chromosome. So most bad things are caused by men. So we can predict when you're born that you're going to be on the side of potentially bad. It doesn't allow us to do anything about it. We have to wait for you to do those things. So when we came to judges with our results, they said, look, we can actually help you decode the intentions of people. And they said, look, you guys, scientists, came to us in the 1920s with phrenology, and you told us that you can touch the scalp and figure out when someone is going to do something bad, and then you came to us 10 years after and you said, no, this was a mistake, EEG is the right way to go, and then you came to us in the 70s with fMRI, and now you're coming to us with your tools. We're going to wait a few decades before we're going to let you actually predict behavior because you change your mind. And I think they're right. I think that we can predict to some extent, but we're still making mistakes, and that's enough to not be a useful tool to really drive a car, just your thoughts.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. Last one.
So I'm actually a couple of questions. The first one is in terms of identifying people's thoughts and intentions. With the state of the research that is there today, is it mostly about trying to identify what areas of the brain get activated when people think some things or have some ideas? Or on the other side, looking at something like your visual feed or the feed that you send to your speech centers or your muscles or whatever. Is that the 2 main things that are there today, or is there something much more advanced than there too?
So the neuroscience of our work has kind of 2 angles, one very applicative, one very theoretical. So the application is we're trying to be really, really good in decoding thoughts, so we can teach you how to control things outside and change your behavior. So we want to help people that smoke to stop smoking. We want to help people who cannot move their arms control a robotic arm or a wheelchair and move around. This is the application. And there we just try to improve the accuracy. If right now I can predict your choice 9 out of 10 times, I want to get to 10 out of 10. That's that. The other angle is neuroscience. The fact that we found how the brain codes a thought in those electrical chemical spikes is still crude. Sometimes you heard that it goes from to, but we don't know exactly like why is it that speed and not that speed. And presumably this carries the most interesting part of our life. Like it's not, the brain doesn't randomly spike. Every spike means something. So we now try to not just be binary and say Marilyn Monroe, not Marilyn Monroe, but actually why is it coding Marilyn Monroe this way, not that way? What about associations? If Marilyn Monroe reminds you of JFK, will the cell that codes Marilyn Monroe fire for Kennedy as well? If it fires for Kennedy, will it fire for Bobby Kennedy and other Kennedys, or just for one that you can? How far is it? So those are interesting questions philosophically. When in your life did you acquire this? Why did it pick this cell and not that cell? So the neuroscience is really both interesting and in need of people with technical skills.
Sure. And the second question was, how transferable is this from one person to the other? Because I'm assuming that the way one person has an idea, or their knowledge base about Marilyn Monroe is entirely different from how another person thinks about the idea of Marilyn Monroe. And so do you see this being applied from, like, say something's 20 years on the line, maybe 10 people, maybe like 1,000 people see a billboard in Times Square, and then somebody captures that data to figure out, just like what Facebook does today in terms of thoughts. Or do you think this is not transferable at all based on the data that you have seen?
So high level, it's very transferable. Low level, it's not. So high level meaning in all of our brains, the part of the brain that codes people is the same. So there's a part that comes to life when you think Marilyn Monroe, when I can think Marilyn Monroe, but within this part there are many, many millions or billions of neurons, and there the organization is totally chaotic. Like your Marilyn Monroe cell is here and mine is there. They're all in the same stadium, but you might sit in section 1 and I'm in section 2, and we didn't find any way to kind of map one brain to another in that high resolution. But there's a Nobel Prize hanging on the understanding of how the brain actually decides which cell to code this. There's all kinds of suggestions like hard drive structures, like defragment memories and moving them overnight. And there's a lot of like theories to what it is, but no one actually knows when the brain chose to put it here and not there and why. Now, the reason it's really, really interesting is that I can map your brain and find Marilyn Monroe and the Eiffel Tower and your mom and dad's cells in your brain, and I can find it in his brain. And once we do that, we can actually override communication. So if you think about historically, we evolved in a lot of ways in the last decades, but communication is still the same way. If you find a Neanderthal right now, he and you would speak the same way. Vocal cords, mouth, and we know that's a pretty slow process. I can think thoughts in about 600 thoughts per minute, sorry, is how much my brain can think, but I can talk them only at 150 words per minute. I can do 300, but you can do 150. So we're very slow. Like we think a lot faster than our bandwidth is to communicate them, and we also receive them in that fast. So clearly there's like a barrier here that if we overcome, if I can just find the Marilyn Monroe cell in your brain and my brain, and when I think it, I just zap your brain and you immediately see it, we can start using high frequency communication, and that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.